The wind moved slow that morning, like it had forgotten where to go. Dust whispered across the plains, gathering at the edges of Hollow Junction like a secret it didn't want to keep. The sun was already climbing, pressing down on roofs and shoulders alike, flattening sound and patience. The town breathed in grunts and glares, its wooden bones creaking under the weight of things unsaid. Calder Holt rode in just past sunup, the reins loose in his fingers, his hat pulled low over tired eyes. He came for nails, oats, maybe a bottle of kerosene, and nothing more. He wasn't a man who wandered for company, and the road between his ranch and town stretched long enough to keep loneliness fed. He dismounted without a word, tying his mare to a hitching post near the general store. Folks noticed him, of course, they always did. Tall, dust-worn, broad through the shoulders and hollow through the eyes. There was a kind of silence that rode with him, a silence that made people either nod quick or look away faster. Some said he hadn't smiled since his wife died. Others said he was born that way, saddle-worn and stone-hearted. The truth, as it often does, sat somewhere between legend and loss. He just stepped into the mercantile when he heard it, a man's voice loud enough to slice through summer heat. Laughter followed. The kind that didn't belong to joy, but something meaner, something grinning with rot. Calder paused, one hand on the doorframe, listening. Outside, in the square, a crowd had gathered like flies on old meat. Men leaning on barrels, women clutching shawls they didn't need in the heat, a few kids trying to look grown. In the center stood a girl, barefoot, dust to her knees, belly round with child. The auctioneer was an old sheriff turned drunk, his badge long tarnished, his voice still loud. "Come now, she's strong, can cook, and she don't talk back unless you want her to. Damaged goods, sure, but beggars ain't choosers." The girl said nothing. Her hair hung in limp braids, the ends frayed like rope burned through. Her eyes weren't pleading. That's what made Calder stop. She wasn't begging. She was enduring. Calder didn't move at first. He watched. Let the scene settle in his bones. The girl shifted once, one hand over her belly, the other at her side clenched. Her knuckles were raw. The baby moved, he could see it. A ripple beneath her dress like a tide coming in. Someone in the crowd called out a number, laughing as he did. A low one. A joke. Calder stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't look at the auctioneer or the crowd. He just dropped a canvas coin pouch into the dust. It hit the ground with a soft thud, spilling silver. The auctioneer blinked. "That's more than she's worth," he said. Calder met his eyes. The man swallowed whatever else he was about to say. No one cheered. No one clapped. Just silence. Awkward. Thick. Calder walked to the girl. She looked at him then, for the first time. Not with hope. Not even confusion. Just curiosity. Like she was trying to decide if he was real, or something her mind had made up in its last quiet collapse. He reached for her hand. Didn't take it, just waited. After a long beat, she placed her palm in his, her fingers trembling but willing. He led her to the mare. Helped her up slow, mindful of her belly. She didn't speak. He didn't either. They left the town behind like something neither of them would speak of again. For a while, the only sound was hoofbeats and the wind's shy breath. Then, as the land began to stretch wide around them, Calder finally asked, voice like gravel rolled smooth. "Got a name?" She looked forward, then down at her hands. "Lena," she said. A pause. "You." "Calder." She nodded once, as if placing it in a drawer. He didn't ask about the father. He didn't ask why she didn't run. He didn't ask how many nights she'd gone hungry, or whether the baby's kicks kept her awake. He knew better than to tug at thread too tight. The sun lowered. Shadows grew. They rode on. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had gone soft with dusk. The land lay quiet, broken only by the creak of the gate and the groan of a tired saddle. Calder helped her down. She winced, but made no sound. He led her to the spare room. There was a cot, a basin, a window that caught the morning light just right. "You'll stay here," he said. She touched the edge of the windowsill, nodded again. Calder left without another word. Later, as the stars began their slow, cold blinking, Lena sat by that window and watched the world breathe. She didn't cry. Not yet. In the barn, Calder fed the mare, moving slower than usual. He looked out toward the house, toward the small square of golden light that marked her window. He didn't know why he'd done it. Not really. Maybe it was the way she stood. Unbowed, even under the weight of shame. Maybe it was the way the crowd looked at her, as if she were less than human. Maybe it was because once, a long time ago, someone had looked at his wife that way, too. He hadn't stopped it then. Maybe he was trying to stop it now. As he leaned against the stall and listened to the wind shift, Calder understood only this. Some wounds don't ask to be healed. They just ask not to be ignored. And Lena, whatever her past, whoever had hurt her, she had not asked for pity. She had only wanted to survive. And now, for reasons he couldn't name, Calder Holt had given her more than coin. He'd given her a place. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to begin again. The prairie stretched silent beneath the stars. A baby turned in the quiet cradle of his mother's womb. And a man who hadn't let anyone close in years stood watching from the shadows, as if hoping, just maybe, that silence might one day turn to something else. Something like peace. Something like home. The days that followed were slow, drawn out like shadows stretching across the land at dusk. Lena moved through Calder's house like a breeze testing its way through a long-closed room, careful, light-footed, uncertain whether to stay. The walls held the silence like breath not yet exhaled. It wasn't a cold silence. It was respectful. A kind of quiet that allowed pain to rest without prodding it into words. Calder kept his distance, not out of rudeness but habit. He was a man whose kindness was quiet and unadvertised. He rose before dawn, fed the animals, mended fences that didn't quite need mending, and let his thoughts curl up where no one could reach them. His grief still clung to him, though it had lost its sharp edges. Now it merely followed like a shadow that had forgotten how to vanish. Lena began tending the space around her, not because he asked, but because her hands ached to be useful. She folded laundry that wasn't hers, white dust from shelves swept the porch when the wind scattered dirt across the boards. She never overstepped. Never rearranged anything that felt sacred. She seemed to understand, instinctively, which things were touched by memory. Her room had one small window that faced east. Each morning, the sun spilled in, catching the soft lines of her growing belly. She would sit at the edge of the bed and rub her stomach in slow circles, whispering to the child within as if her voice might weave a safety net too fragile for the world to see. She never referred to the baby as he or she, only as little one, her voice warm but tempered with uncertainty. They didn't speak much, but small exchanges began to grow between them, like the first green shoots in thawed earth. One morning, Calder found a plate of warm biscuits on the kitchen table beside his coffee mug. He said nothing, only sat down and ate in slow, thoughtful silence. That afternoon, Lena returned to her room to find a small basket of fresh apples waiting on her windowsill, each one polished to a quiet shine. She didn't need a note to know where they'd come from. Their routines became threads, gently woven. Calder repaired the back steps. Lena stitched a curtain for the pantry. She mended one of his worn flannel shirts, folding it neatly and leaving it beside his boots. He stacked an extra blanket at the foot of her bed before the cold crept in. Nothing was spoken. Everything was understood. At night, the ranch settled into a hush so profound it felt holy. Lena would lie awake and listen to the wind push softly against the eaves, the distant howl of a coyote, the slow creak of the old barn as it settled into itself. Sometimes she imagined Calder sitting by the fireplace downstairs, staring into the embers with that stillness he wore like an old coat. One evening, the sky rolled with distant thunder, not loud, but enough to stir something in her. She stepped onto the porch, arms wrapped around her belly. The air smelled of coming rain and something else, something clean and unfamiliar. Calder was sitting near the edge of the porch, whittling a piece of cedar into something shapeless. She joined him quietly. He didn't look up, but she felt him shift slightly, as though making space for her presence. After a long silence, she asked, "Did you always live alone?" His hand paused. Then, just as gently, he said, "Not always." She waited, but nothing more came. She didn't push. A few heartbeats passed, then she murmured, "I used to dream about a house just like this. Not big, not fancy. Just safe." Calder nodded, his gaze still fixed on the small curl of wood falling from his knife. "Safe's a good start." She turned her head toward him, her voice softer now. "That man who left me, he said I ruined him. Said I was too much trouble to carry through life. Like a busted wagon wheel." Calder didn't respond right away. Then he set down the carving and knife, slow and deliberate. "There are men who break things they're too small to carry," he said. "That don't mean the thing was worthless." Lena blinked, eyes burning, but she didn't let the tears fall. She just sat beside him, the storm brushing past the edge of the horizon, the scent of cedar between them. That night, Calder couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, watching the soft drizzle fall over the fields. Something about her words stayed in his mind longer than he expected. A busted wagon wheel. He wondered who taught her to think of herself that way. He hated how easy it was to believe that once a thing was broken, it couldn't be mended. The next morning, Calder rose before the sun and took to the garden plot near the house. It hadn't been tended in years, not since his wife. He turned the earth with aching shoulders, pulling weeds, digging through the hardened soil. He planted nothing grand, just a few seeds, simple things, beans, corn, and wildflower roots he found near the creek. By the time Lena rose and looked out her window, he was already finishing, dust on his boots, hair damp with effort. She didn't say anything, but later that day, she placed a cup of mint tea on the step beside him while he sharpened a hoe. He nodded once. She sat on the porch swing and began to hum, low and quiet, a tune with no name but a melody that sounded like hope remembering itself. One afternoon, Lena found a small wooden box outside her door. Inside was a hand-carved figure of a rabbit, rough but endearing, with long ears and a crooked smile. She didn't ask if it was meant for the baby, or for her. She simply placed it on the windowsill, where the light could find it. A week passed. Then another. Lena grew rounder, steadier. Calder moved more freely, less like a man dragging ghosts behind him. The air around the house felt different now, not healed, but healing. Then came the moment neither of them expected. Lena had gone to the barn to find a bucket. She was moving slow, the way she did when the child weighed heavy on her bones. She stepped wrong, her ankle twisting sharply. She yelped as she went down, catching herself on a low beam. Calder was there before she could stand, his hands steadying her shoulders. "You all right?" he asked, the most urgent words he'd spoken since she arrived. She nodded, biting her lip. "Just a twist. I'm fine." But he didn't move away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, not just at her bruised skin or weary eyes, but at all of her, everything she carried. And in that breathless moment, she felt something shift, not in the world, but in her. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just looked back. And for the first time since she arrived, she believed she might stay. Not because she had to, but because this place had begun to feel like something she thought she'd never find again. A beginning. Autumn came quietly, painting the ranch in shades of gold and rust. The trees along the creek had begun their slow surrender, leaves loosening without protest, drifting to the ground like old regrets finding rest. The air turned crisp, and the skies wore that deep, endless blue that only arrived when summer had finally given up its grip. Inside the house, the rhythms between Calder and Lena had settled into something almost tender. Not quite love, not yet, but something waiting beneath the surface. Something patient. She cooked breakfast now, slow and thoughtful, her movements steady despite the weight she carried. He brought firewood inside without asking. Left it stacked by the hearth where she could reach it. Their words were still few, but fuller, like the soil Calder had turned weeks before, ready for something new. The child was due soon. The days stretched thin with expectation, with quiet preparation. Calder built a cradle with his own hands, smoothing the edges until they felt like riverstone. He didn't say it was a gift. Just left it at the foot of Lena's bed one morning, the wood still warm from the sun. She ran her hands over it, the way one might trace the grain of memory. Her eyes didn't shine. She wasn't the kind to weep easily. But when she sat down beside the cradle, she closed her eyes for a long time, as if praying not with words, but with breath. It was the first time she felt what safety could become when it's given long enough to bloom. One evening, as they shelled beans on the porch, Lena asked the question she had carried like a stone in her chest. "Why me?" Calder didn't look up. He worked slowly, thumbs moving over the pods with practiced ease. "You weren't meant to be standing in that square," she said. "No one else moved. Just you." He leaned back, rubbed his palms together to shake loose the last husks. "I don't know," he said finally. "I just saw a person who shouldn't be left where they were." She studied his profile, how the light hit the line of his jaw. "But you didn't know me. I didn't need to." The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. The kind of quiet that holds something sacred. Later that night, Lena went to bed with her hand on her stomach, tracing small circles like clock hands. She whispered to the child that the world could still surprise her. That sometimes a soul broken by loss could carry another without breaking again. Calder stood by the barn that same night, eyes turned to the stars. He remembered the way his wife used to hum when she stirred stew, the way her fingers tapped against the edge of the table when she read. Those memories no longer clawed at him. They had settled now, gentler. He realized then, perhaps what he'd built with Lena was not a replacement, but a second chance carved from the same sorrow. The days passed gently. A new quilt appeared on Lena's bed, stitched from old shirts and softer fabric scraps. Calder fixed the squeaky hinge on her door without a word. Lena left small jars of plum preserves on the pantry shelf, each labeled in her careful script. They were building something, and though no one called it by name, both of them knew it. But peace never lingers too long on land marked by suffering. One cloudy morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Dust curled behind his horse like smoke from an old fire. Calder stepped out to meet him, his stance easy but alert. The man was thin, slick-haired, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a girl," he said, brushing his hat. "Pregnant. Left town a while back. Heard she came this way." Lena heard the voice before she saw the face. And when she stepped out onto the porch, her body froze, eyes locked on the man who had once claimed her. He grinned when he saw her. "Well, well. Didn't think you'd land yourself a quiet little setup like this." Calder didn't move, didn't speak. But something in him went still, like a flame sharpening into heat. "She's not yours," Calder said evenly. The man chuckled. "Ain't up to you, old man. She's carrying my blood." Lena stepped forward, her hands folded over her belly. Her voice, when it came, was low and unshaking. "You left me to be auctioned off like cattle. You don't get to claim me now." The man laughed again, but it was thinner this time. "Doesn't matter. The law don't care how things went down. I got papers. Marriage papers." Calder's jaw tightened. He looked at Lena. She nodded once. That night, after the man rode off with a promise to return, papers in hand, Calder sat on the edge of the porch with his rifle across his knees. "We'll fight this if we have to," he said. Lena stood behind him, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." He turned to look at her, and in her face he saw not defiance, but clarity. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about this life we're making. I won't let him undo it." Something shifted between them in that moment. Not spoken, not touched. Just a mutual recognition. They weren't just two lost souls anymore. They were tethered now, not by need, but by choice. Later, Calder showed her the rifle's hiding place, how to aim if she needed to. She listened, hands calm. He showed her the back trail through the woods in case running became the only way. But neither of them truly planned to run. Instead, they prepared. Quietly. Together. And in the stillness of those preparations, Lena went into labor. It began with soft pain, like a tide inching toward the shore. Calder found her doubled over by the window, hands braced against the frame. He moved fast, but not frantic. Heated water. Laid towels. Steeled himself. Hours passed. Long hours. She didn't scream. She breathed through it like a storm she'd known was always coming. Calder held her hand through every contraction, wiping her brow, murmuring words he didn't even know he had in him. And when the child came, slick and squalling, he caught it with trembling hands. A girl. Small, fierce, already full of life. Lena wept then, not from pain but from something deeper. Calder wrapped the baby in a quilt, and handed her over with a look that held everything he didn't know how to say. They sat there in the quiet, just the three of them, the fire low and steady, the storm outside forgotten. And for the first time, Calder allowed himself to smile. Not for the past, but for what had finally come. A beginning. A family. But just beyond the trees, the dust would rise again soon. The man would return, and with him, the law and all its cold intentions. Yet in that moment they did not fear. Because some things, some bonds, cannot be undone by ink on paper. Some truths are born in silence, held in hands that know how to protect. And Lena, holding her daughter close, understood that while the past might knock again, she was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was the mother who had survived. And she was no longer alone. The mornings after birth carry a strange quiet, one stitched from awe, exhaustion, and the weight of something new settling into the bones. Lena sat by the hearth, her daughter bundled against her chest, tiny breath warm through the layers of fabric. The world outside the window moved slow, mist curling through the valley like a memory not yet willing to leave, frost kissing the edge of every blade of grass. The ranch had never looked so still. Calder moved around her with the gentleness of someone guarding a flame in wind. He brought warm broth in the mornings, checked the cradle each time he passed the room, even if just to run a finger along the rim. He didn't speak much, but every silence now was thick with care. His presence had become a kind of promise. Not in words, but in the way he watched over the house as if he'd built it to shield them both. Lena felt it too, that weight and warmth of being seen. She had bled and cried and come undone in front of this man, and he had met it all without flinching. Still, she hadn't yet told him what haunted her most, not the auction, not the abandonment, but the fear that what had begun in sorrow could not last in peace. Each day she waited for the rider. The man who once claimed her like land he had walked away from. He hadn't returned yet, but his shadow lingered coiled like smoke just outside the door. Calder had spoken with the sheriff. There was little the law could do if the papers the man brought were true. Legally married. Legally his. Even if she'd been forced. Even if he'd left her to rot. But Lena wasn't a girl anymore. She was a mother now. Her spine had lengthened with that truth. Her breath moved differently. She would not leave this child to fate. One afternoon, as the wind picked up and the sky wore the pale gray of unfinished thoughts, Lena found Calder sitting by the barn, sharpening a blade he rarely used. She sat beside him, baby in her arms, quiet at first. Then she asked, "If he comes, what will you do?" Calder didn't lift his eyes. "Whatever I have to. Even if it means losing the land?" He set the blade down. "Land can be taken. Lives can't be replaced." She watched him for a long while after that. The way his hands rested open, not clenched. The steadiness in his gaze. He wasn't a man who needed to shout to make his promise known. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. He looked at her, patient as ever. She shifted the baby gently to her shoulder. "When he left me in that square, I stopped believing I mattered. Not just to him. To anyone. I was nothing but a burden. Something left behind." Calder's face didn't change, but something in his shoulders bent toward her like a tree towards sunlight. "I thought maybe you saved me because I looked small enough to carry," she continued. "But you didn't carry me. You let me walk beside you. I need you to know that changed everything. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached over and touched the baby's tiny hand. You changed everything too. That night, the fire burned low but steady. Lena sat rocking the child, humming a tune her mother once sang when the wind whistled through the cracks in the wall. She couldn't remember all the words, just the feeling of being wrapped in it like warmth during a storm. Suddenly, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. She froze. Calder was already standing, gun in hand. Outside, the lantern by the porch swung slightly in the wind. A single rider stood in the dark, hoarse breath billowing, eyes sharp beneath the brim. Lena stepped forward, the baby pressed against her chest. Her breath trembled, but her steps did not. The man dismounted with a smirk, holding a folder in his gloved hand. Got the papers, he said, voice smug and sour. She's mine. Law says so. Calder stood beside her, unmoving. Not anymore. The man's eyes flicked between them. You think living out here makes you special? You think this place is gonna protect you? I don't need protection, Lena said quietly. I just need you to leave. He scoffed. You think because you had the kid, you get to rewrite everything? You're still mine. Still married. Still got my name whether you like it or not. Lena stepped down the porch slowly. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice was calm. You never earned that name. You never earned me. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded sheet, one Calder had helped her send weeks ago. I filed for annulment, she said. The church received it. The sheriff has a copy. You left me in a public square to be bought by strangers. You broke every vow you ever spoke. The man's face darkened. That don't mean. It means I am not yours, she said firmly. Not in name. Not in law. And never again in fear. Calder stepped forward then, not with violence, but with presence. You ride out now, he said, or you answer to me. And I don't care much for what your papers say. For a moment, no one moved. Then the man's jaw tightened. He looked between them, at Lena's steady eyes, at the baby's sleeping form, at the man who stood between him and what he thought he could still own. He spat in the dirt. You're not worth it. And then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode back into the dark. The silence afterward felt like breath held too long finally let go. Lena sagged slightly, her knees threatening to buckle. Calder caught her elbow, guided her back inside. They didn't speak again that night. But sleep came easier. The kind that sinks deep and pulls the soul with it. The next morning, the sun rose soft and clear. The baby cooed, stretching tiny fingers in the cradle Calder built. Lena stood by the window, her hand resting against the pane. She felt the light on her face. Felt the quiet of safety earned, not given. And when Calder came to stand beside her, their shoulders brushing like threads being tied, she turned to him with a softness that asked for nothing but gave everything. I think, she whispered, this might be the beginning. Calder looked at her, then at the child. Then he smiled, small, real, and whole. It already is. Winter rolled in slow, not with violence but with certainty. Snow whispered its arrival across the plains, dusting rooftops and blanketing the earth in white silence. The creek froze over in delicate glass threads, and the trees stood bare, their skeletons solemn beneath a sky that hung low and silver. Life slowed at the ranch, drawing inward like breath before a long exhale. Inside, the warmth grew. Not just from the hearth or the kettle that rarely left its place above the fire, but from the way time had begun knitting Calder and Lena together. Not hurried. Not desperate. Just a steady weaving of lives that had once been frayed too thin to hold. The baby, named Wella, after Calder's late mother, was growing fast. Her cheeks were round now, her cries sharper, her little fists often curled around a lock of Lena's hair or Calder's calloused finger. Lena had found her rhythm in this quiet world. Her steps no longer hesitant, her voice no longer unsure. There were scars, of course, some deep, some still healing, but she wore them without shame. They no longer marked her as broken, only as someone who had survived the storm and learned how to plant again when the soil felt ready. Calder watched her sometimes when she didn't know. The way she held Willa, the way she murmured stories from memory or sang soft notes that never quite formed full songs. He didn't have the words to describe what she had become to him. She wasn't a replacement for what he'd lost. He knew now that no soul could fill another's absence. But she was the beginning of something new, something made not from forgetting, but from forgiving the ache that came before. And yet, peace is never left untested for long in the West. One evening, as the snow thickened and dusk draped itself over the land, Calder rode into town for supplies. He returned slower than usual. His face tight. His eyes storm-dark. Lena met him at the door, concern blooming immediately. Calder set the sack down carefully and said only, "The man came back. Brought a marshal with him." Her breath caught in her throat. "They're trying to file a claim," he said. "Said the annulment didn't hold weight in their county. He's twisting the truth. Making noise about abduction, about hiding a child from its rightful father." Lena's hands tightened around the edge of the table. "I'll leave," she whispered. "If I run, maybe." Calder reached for her gently. "No. You don't run from something that's yours by right. He doesn't win by making you afraid again." She met his gaze. Her fear didn't leave, but it stood beside something else now. Resolve. That night, they talked with the sheriff. With the preacher. Calder rode to the judge in the next town over, bringing every piece of evidence, every testimony. Lena gave her account again, voice unwavering this time, face calm. It became clear what they were up against. The man hadn't come for love or law. He had come for revenge. For ego. For the need to prove he could still take something just because he wanted to. But the town had changed since Lena first arrived in silence. People remembered. They had seen her rise. Seen Calder offer her nothing but respect and a quiet place to heal. The townsfolk, gruff and cautious as they were, began to murmur their support. The preacher spoke for her. The midwife testified to Calder's devotion and Lena's courage. Still, the law was a slow beast, and papers carry weight, even if forged with cruelty. The hearing was set. One chance to defend the life they had made. On the morning of the trial, the snow fell heavier than ever. Calder helped Lena into the wagon, wrapped Wella tight, and placed her in Lena's arms like a treasure that deserved nothing less than holy reverence. As they rode into town, Lena thought of that auction square, of the dirt beneath her feet and the feeling of being nothing. Now she rode beside a man who had asked for nothing but given her everything. A child nestled against her chest, heart drumming in rhythm with her own. The courthouse was cold and quiet. The man waited inside, smug in his posture, papers clenched in one fist. The marshal stood nearby, unreadable. The judge sat at the far end, spectacles perched, eyes already tired. The case was laid out. The man claimed marriage. Claimed blood rights. Claimed betrayal. But when Lena stood, something shifted in the room. She didn't speak like a victim. She didn't tremble. "I was sold," she said. "Left without coin or care. He never once came for me until he heard I had found peace." She looked to Calder then. "This man did not rescue me. He simply saw me. Let me be. Let me become." She held Wella higher. "This child was born in safety, in kindness. And she deserves to grow in it." Calder spoke next. Brief, direct, but his voice carried weight. "The West doesn't need more men who take. It needs more who build." The room was silent after that. No one breathed for a moment too long. Then the judge cleared his throat. He leaned forward slowly. "Annulment stands," he said. "No man has the right to call himself a husband if he leaves his wife to die." The man stood, voice rising in protest, but the sheriff stepped forward. "That's enough," he said. "You lost. Ride out. Don't return." And just like that, it ended. Not in gunfire or chaos, but in truth spoken loud enough to quiet a liar. They left the courthouse into a snowfall that softened every harsh edge of the town. Back at the ranch, Calder set the fire high. Lena laid Wella in her cradle, then sat beside it with tears she hadn't let fall in days. "It's over," she whispered. "No," Calder said gently, brushing her hand with his. "It's only just begun." That night, as wind howled against the windows and the fire cast dancing shadows across the walls, Calder took out the old family journal. He added a page. He didn't write a name. Just a date. A sentence. "She came into our home with nothing and gave us everything." Lena found it the next morning, tucked beneath the cradle. She read it once, then twice, then held it to her chest like scripture. Later that day, Calder stood by the barn, snow in his hair. Lena walked to him, took his hand. No words passed. Just two people, no longer strangers to pain or peace, bound now not by what they had escaped, but by what they had chosen. A life born from ashes. A family carved from silence. And a love that had never asked to be grand, only true.